The evening shadows stretched across the polished floors of Westfield Conservatory as Elena Ruiz pushed her cleaning cart down the long hallway. The wheels squeaked slightly. She'd been meaning to oil them for weeks now. The sound echoed against the walls covered with framed photographs of famous musicians and newspaper clippings about successful students. 7 years of cleaning these same halls, and Elena still felt like a ghost passing through a world that couldn't see her. Most nights, the teachers and students looked right past her. She was just the cleaning lady after all. Just the woman in the gray uniform who emptied their trash cans and wiped fingerprints from the glass display cases. Just the quiet foreigner with the accent who kept her eyes down and her voice soft. "Excuse me," Elena murmured as a group of young students rushed past her, laughing and talking about their upcoming recital. None of them looked her way or paused their conversation. She pressed herself against the wall, waiting for them to pass, her cart blocking only the smallest part of the hallway. Through an open door, Elena could hear the bright notes of a Mozart sonata being played. The student was good, technically skilled, but Elena could hear the small mistakes, the places where the rhythm faltered slightly or a note was struck too forcefully. Without thinking, her fingers twitched at her side, muscle memory playing, the correct notes in the air. She continued her work, spraying glass cleaner on the trophy case and wiping it in careful circles. Inside, golden figures of pianos and music notes gleamed under the lights. Competitions won, talents recognized, dreams fulfilled. Elena's reflection looked back at her from the glass, a woman in her mid-40s with her dark hair pulled back, in a practical bun, lines beginning to form around her eyes and mouth. Hands red and slightly rough from years of cleaning chemicals. These hands had once been her pride. Long fingers, strong and flexible, capable of stretching to reach difficult chords and moving with lightning speed across piano keys. Now they held mops and scrubbing brushes, and the calluses they bore came from work, not from hours of practice. "Mrs. Ruiz, the practice room on the second floor needs attention. Someone spilled coffee all over the floor." Elena turned to see Ms. Phillips, the evening administrator, standing with her ever-present clipboard. Unlike some of the teachers, Ms. Phillips always acknowledged Elena, always used her name. It was a small kindness that Elena appreciated. "Yes, I go now," Elena replied with a nod. "And when you're done with that," Dr. Hargrove asked at his office, "be clean tonight. He's hosting some important visitors tomorrow." Elena's stomach tightened at the mention of Dr. Hargrove, the head of the piano department. Of all the teachers at Westfield, he was the one who made her most uncomfortable. His critical eye seemed to find fault with everything and everyone. She had once seen him reduce a student to tears over a barely noticeable mistake in a Chopin etude. "I will do good job," Elena promised, already turning her cart toward the stairs. "I know you will," Ms. Phillips said with a small smile before walking away. The spilled coffee took longer to clean than Elena expected. The liquid had seeped between the floorboards, requiring her to get down on hands and knees with a small brush to reach the sticky residue. By the time she finished, most of the practice rooms were empty, the students gone home for the evening. This was her favorite time at the conservatory, when the building was quiet except for the occasional distant piano. She could move through the halls freely without worrying about being in anyone's way, without feeling invisible. She made her way to Dr. Hargrove's office, knocking softly, even though she knew it would be empty. The room smelled of leather and the faint trace of expensive cologne. Everything was perfectly organized, books aligned by height on the shelves, papers stacked neatly on the desk, pens arranged in a straight line. As she dusted the shelves, Elena's eyes fell on a framed program from a concert in Vienna. Dr. Hargrove had performed Rachmaninoff's Third Piano Concerto with the Vienna Philharmonic 15 years ago. Elena's heart quickened at the sight of it. That piece, one of the most difficult in the piano repertoire, had once been hers too. On the corner of his desk sat a small stack of sheet music. Unable to help herself, Elena glanced at the top page. The familiar notes of that same Rachmaninoff concerto stared back at her. Her fingers itched with the memory of playing those very passages, the complex rhythms and crashing chords that had once flowed from her hands like water. 20 years. It had been 20 years since she'd truly played. Not since the accident, not since she'd left Spain and her promising career behind, not since she'd packed away her music along with her grief and boarded a plane to America with her 5-year-old brother in tow. Elena finished cleaning the office quickly, not allowing herself to look at the music again. As she pushed her cart back into the hallway, she heard it, the sound of a piano from the main recital hall. Someone was playing late. The piece was familiar. Debussy's Clair de Lune. The playing was lovely but hesitant, as though the pianist was still learning the piece. Without conscious thought, Elena found herself drawn toward the sound. The double doors to the recital hall were partially open, and she peered through the gap. A young girl, perhaps 12 or 13, sat at the magnificent Steinway concert grand. Her small hands moved carefully over the keys, her face a study in concentration. Elena should have continued with her work. There were still bathrooms to clean and trash cans to empty, but something kept her there, watching the girl struggle with a particularly difficult passage, playing it over and over without quite capturing the flowing quality the piece demanded. When the girl sighed and dropped her hands into her lap in frustration, Elena found herself speaking. "Try to think of water," she said softly from the doorway. "Not notes. Water moving like small waves." The girl jumped, startled by the voice, and turned to look at Elena with wide eyes. "I'm sorry," Elena said quickly, embarrassed. "I did not mean to interrupt." "No, it's okay," the girl said. "What do you mean about water?" Elena hesitated, then stepped into the room, leaving her cart by the door. "This music, it is about moonlight on water, yes? So hands must flow like this." She held her hands out, making a gentle wave-like motion in the air. The girl looked at her curiously. "Are you a teacher here? I haven't seen you before." A small, sad smile touched Elena's lips. "No. I clean here." "Oh." The girl seemed confused, but not dismissive. "But you know about piano?" "A little," Elena said, the understatement sitting heavy on her tongue. "May I?" she asked, gesturing to the space on the bench beside the girl. After a moment's hesitation, the girl slid over. "I'm Lily," she offered. "Elena," she replied, sitting down carefully, aware of her gray uniform and the faint smell of cleaning products that clung to her. She held her hands above the keys but didn't touch them. "Watch. The wrists must stay relaxed like water flowing. The music breathes here and here," she said, indicating places in the sheet music where the phrasing needed special attention. Lily tried again, incorporating Elena's suggestions. The difference was immediate. The music began to take on the dreamlike quality it required. "That's so much better," Lily exclaimed. "How did you know that?" Before Elena could answer, a sharp voice cut through the room. "Lily, what are you still doing here? Your mother called the front desk looking for you." They both turned to see Dr. Hargrove striding into the recital hall, his face set in its usual stern expression. His eyes narrowed when he saw Elena sitting at the piano. "Mrs. Ruiz, isn't it?" he said coldly. "I believe you're paid to clean the conservatory, not to interrupt students' practice sessions." Elena stood quickly, smoothing her uniform with shaking hands. "I am sorry, sir. I was just—" "She was helping me with this Debussy piece," Lily interrupted. "She gave me some really good advice about the phrasing." Dr. Hargrove raised an eyebrow, looking from the young student to the cleaning woman with obvious disbelief. "Did she now? Well, while I'm sure Mrs. Ruiz means well, Lily, I think you'd be better served getting advice from actual music professionals." He turned to Elena. "My office should be your priority right now, not playing at being a teacher." "I cleaned your office already, sir," Elena said quietly, her eyes downcast. "Everything is ready for your visitors tomorrow." "Good. Then I suggest you continue with your actual duties." His dismissal was clear. Elena nodded and backed away from the piano, the familiar ache of loss rising in her chest. "Good night, Lily," she said softly. "Your playing is beautiful." As she pushed her cart away from the recital hall, she could hear Dr. Hargrove's voice behind her, explaining to Lily about proper technique and the importance of learning from qualified instructors. Elena's hands gripped the handle of her cart tightly, the memory of the piano keys still warm against her fingertips. Later that night, after all the students and teachers had gone and the building stood empty and silent, Elena returned to the recital hall. She stood beside the magnificent Steinway, her cleaning forgotten for a moment as she gazed at its gleaming surface and perfect ivory keys. 20 years of silence. 20 years of buried talent. 20 years of being invisible. Her fingers hovered over the keys, not quite touching them, a ritual she allowed herself only rarely. In her mind, she could hear the thundering opening of Rachmaninoff's Third Concerto, could feel the power and emotion of it. For a brief moment, she was back on stage in Madrid, her future bright and limitless before her. Then reality returned. Elena sighed and dropped her hands to her sides. She turned away from the piano and went back to her cart, back to her cleaning, back to the life she had chosen when everything else had been taken away. Some dreams were better left in the past, she told herself. But as she worked through the quiet building, her hands continued to play silent music in the air. The next morning, Elena arrived at the conservatory earlier than usual. Her conversation with Lily had stirred something inside her, a restlessness she hadn't felt in years. She had barely slept, her dreams filled with music and memories of a different life. The hallways were quiet at this hour, most students and teachers not due to arrive for another 2 hours. Elena liked this peaceful time when she could work without feeling like she was in the way. She started in the practice rooms, wiping down the pianos and polishing the wooden floors. In the third practice room, a stack of sheet music had been left on top of the upright piano. Elena straightened the pages, her eyes automatically scanning the notes. Chopin's Ballad No. 1 in G minor, a piece she had once performed in Warsaw when she was just 19. Without thinking, she hummed a few bars, her fingers twitching at her side. "You know Chopin?" Elena jumped, nearly dropping the music. She hadn't heard anyone enter the room. A tall woman with silver-streaked hair stood in the doorway, watching her with curious eyes. Elena recognized her as Professor Chen, one of the older piano teachers who had been at the conservatory for decades. Elena hesitated, unsure how to respond. "I have heard it before." Professor Chen stepped into the room, her head tilted slightly as she studied Elena. "You were humming the middle section perfectly, not the main theme that everyone knows. That's interesting." Elena felt her cheeks warm under the scrutiny. "I clean many years here. I hear much music." Professor Chen didn't look convinced, but she didn't press further. "Well, you have a good ear then." "Thank you," Elena murmured, returning to her cleaning cart. "I've finished now." As she hurried from the room, she could feel Professor Chen's eyes following her. The encounter left her unsettled. She had been careless, letting her guard down. For 7 years she had been careful not to show any knowledge of music beyond what would be expected from someone who simply worked in the building. By mid-morning, the conservatory was alive with activity. Students rushed between classes, the sounds of various instruments spilled from practice rooms, and teachers called out last-minute instructions about upcoming recitals. Elena kept her head down as she worked, trying to blend into the background, as she always did. She was mopping the floor near the faculty lounge when she overheard raised voices from inside. Normally she would have moved on, giving the teachers privacy, but she heard Dr. Hargrove mention the spring showcase and curiosity kept her in place. "We need something spectacular this year," Dr. Hargrove was saying, his voice carrying clearly through the partially open door. "Last year's showcase was forgettable at best. The donors were underwhelmed." "The students worked very hard," another voice protested, Professor Garcia from the strings department. "Hard work isn't enough," Dr. Hargrove replied dismissively. "We need brilliance. We need to remind everyone why Westfield is considered one of the top conservatories in the country." "What do you suggest?" asked a third voice. "Professor Chen. Rachmaninoff's Piano Concerto No. 3, Dr. Hargrove announced. One of the most technically demanding pieces ever written." There was a moment of silence, then several voices spoke at once. "None of our current students could handle that piece," someone objected. "It's too ambitious. Maybe in a few years, but not now." Dr. Hargrove cut them off. Thomas Shu could do it. He's the most technically proficient student we have. Thomas is technically skilled, yes, Professor Chen said carefully. But Rachmaninoff requires more than technique. It requires soul, emotional depth. Thomas plays, like a machine, perfect notes but no heart. Well, unless you can produce a piano prodigy in the next 2 months, Chen, Thomas is our best option. The conversation shifted to other departments, and Elena continued her work, moving away from the lounge. Rachmaninoff's Third Concerto. Her heart beat faster at the mere mention of the piece. She had been preparing to perform it with the Madrid Philharmonic when her parents died. The piece had died with them, buried along with her dreams and ambitions. Later, that afternoon, Elena was emptying trash bins in the administrative wing when she heard someone call her name. She turned to see Ms. Phillips hurrying toward her. "Mrs. Ruiz, I've been looking for you," the administrator said, slightly out of breath. "We have a situation in the main recital hall. Someone spilled coffee all over the stage floor, and there's an important faculty meeting about to start there. Can you come right away?" "Yes, of course," Elena replied, already gathering her cleaning supplies. When she arrived at the recital hall, several faculty members were already seated in the first few rows of the auditorium, while others stood in small groups on the stage, carefully avoiding the large coffee stain that spread across the polished wood. Dr. Hargrove looked up as Elena entered. "Finally," he said impatiently. "Please clean this up quickly. We're already behind schedule." Elena nodded and set to work, keeping her eyes down as she knelt on the stage and began to clean the spill. The teachers continued their meeting around her, as though she were invisible. "As I was saying," Dr. Hargrove continued, "I've selected Thomas Chu to perform the Rachmaninoff for the spring showcase. I've already spoken with him, and he's eager for the challenge." "I still think it's too ambitious," Professor Chen said. "Even professional pianists struggle with that piece." "Thomas has the technical skills," Dr. Hargrove insisted, "but does he have the emotional connection to the music?" Professor Chen countered. "Rachmaninoff wrote that concerto as an expression of his innermost feelings. It requires vulnerability, passion, qualities that Thomas hasn't demonstrated yet." As the debate continued, Elena worked quietly, trying not to listen, trying not to remember how that music had once flowed from her own hands, how she had once understood every note, every dynamic marking, every subtle shift in tempo as though Rachmaninoff had written them specifically for her. "The decision has been made," Dr. Hargrove said firmly, ending the discussion. "Now, let's move on to the other departments." Elena had almost finished cleaning when she felt someone watching her. She looked up to find Professor Chen studying her with that same curious expression from earlier that morning. The meeting wound down about 20 minutes later. As the faculty began to disperse, Elena gathered her cleaning supplies, eager to retreat to the quiet hallways and away from the teacher's scrutiny. "Wait a moment," Dr. Hargrove called out, and Elena froze, thinking he was addressing her. But he was looking at his colleagues. "Before we go, I want to show you the sheet music I've selected for Thomas. I've marked some sections that need particular attention." He walked over to the grand piano at the center of the stage and placed a thick stack of papers on the music stand. The other faculty members gathered around, examining the score and discussing various technical challenges. "This cadenza is particularly difficult," Professor Garcia noted, pointing to a section of densely packed notes. "That's precisely why it will impress the donors," Dr. Hargrove replied with satisfaction. As Elena turned to leave, Dr. Hargrove suddenly looked her way. A strange expression crossed his face, something between irritation and inspiration. "You," he called out, making Elena stop in her tracks. "Our cleaning lady, come here." Hesitantly, Elena approached the group of teachers, her heart beginning to race. Had she done something wrong? "Sit," he commanded, pointing to the piano bench. Elena stood frozen, not understanding. "Sir?" "Sit at the piano," Dr. Hargrove repeated, more firmly this time. Some of the other teachers exchanged uncomfortable glances. "Richard, what are you doing?" Professor Chen asked quietly. "A little experiment," he replied, a hint of cruel amusement in his voice. Since we're discussing whether Thomas has the right feeling for this piece, let's see what someone with no training at all makes of it. Elena's mouth went dry. I need to finish cleaning. That can wait, Dr. Hargrove interrupted. Sit. Slowly, Elena set down her cleaning supplies and approached the piano. The beautiful Steinway concert grand seemed to gleam under the stage lights, both welcoming and threatening. She perched nervously on the edge of the bench, her hands folded tightly in her lap. Play something, Dr. Hargrove instructed, dropping the Rachmaninoff score in front of her. Anything. Since you're always lurking around our pianos, surely you've picked up something by now. The other teachers shifted uncomfortably. Professor, Chen frowned, clearly disapproving of the situation. Richard, this is inappropriate, she said firmly. It's just a bit of fun, he replied dismissively. Well? He prompted Elena. We're waiting. Elena stared at the sheet music before her. The familiar notes of a piece she had once known by heart, a piece she had once lived and breathed and loved. 20 years of silence seemed to stretch between her fingers and the keys. I clean only, she said softly, her accent thicker than usual due to her nervousness. No play. Just as I thought, Dr. Hargrove smirked. Well, humor us. Try a few notes, then we'll let you get back to your mop. Elena felt trapped. If she refused again, he might become angry, might even complain to her supervisor. But if she really played, everything would change. The careful wall she had built between her past and present would crumble. Go on, Dr. Hargrove urged, his tone making it clear it wasn't a request. Slowly, Elena placed her work-worn hands on the keys. She could feel the cool ivory beneath her fingertips, so familiar yet so foreign after all these years. The faculty, members watched with varying expressions, amusement, embarrassment, curiosity. Elena took a deep breath and made her decision. Elena's fingers rested on the keys, barely touching them. The weight of 20 years pressed down on her shoulders. She could feel every eye in the room fixed on her, waiting. Dr. Hargrove stood with his arms crossed, a smug smile playing at the corners of his mouth. He expected her to fumble, to embarrass herself, to provide a moment of cruel entertainment at her expense. She glanced up at the sheet music before her. Rachmaninoff's Third Piano Concerto. The opening theme was deceptively simple, a quiet, almost shy melody that belied the storm to come. Elena had once known every note, every dynamic marking, every subtle shift in this piece. She had fallen asleep with it playing in her mind and woken up with her fingers already moving through the passages. But that was 20 years ago, before grief had silenced her music, before she had packed away her dreams along with her concert dresses. We don't have all day, Dr. Hargrove said impatiently. Elena closed her eyes. She could walk away right now. She could stand up, apologize, return to her cleaning cart, and continue the quiet, invisible life she had built for herself. The safe life. The life without risk or pain or the terrible, wonderful vulnerability that came with making music. Or, she could play. A memory surfaced, her father's voice, gentle but firm. Music that stays inside you dies, Elena. It must be set free. She took a deep breath and began to play. The opening notes of Rachmaninoff's concerto filled the room, soft and hesitant at first, like a question being asked. Elena's fingers remembered what her mind had tried to forget. The melody flowed from her hands as naturally as breathing. She heard a small gasp from someone behind her but didn't turn to look. The music was carrying her now, drawing her deeper into its world. The simple, theme-developed grew more complex. Her left hand joined in with rich harmonies while her right hand continued the melody. Then came the moment when the piece truly announced itself, the theme returning with greater intensity, supported by full chords and a driving rhythm. Elena's hands stretched to reach the difficult intervals, her body swaying slightly as she leaned into the music. She was dimly aware of movement around her, more people entering the hall, drawn by the unexpected sound of virtuoso playing. But Elena saw none of them. She had entered that sacred space that exists only between a musician and the music, a place of perfect communication, where notes on a page become living emotion. The first movement of the concerto was a journey through landscapes of sound, from quiet valleys of introspection to soaring peaks of passion. Elena traveled through them all, her hands flying across the keys with a speed and precision that belied their years of disuse. The technical challenges that made this piece so notorious among pianists, the rapid scales, the complex rhythms, the crashing chords that required immense strength and control, all came to her as if she had never stopped practicing. When she reached the cadenza, the extended solo section where the pianist is given freedom to demonstrate their virtuosity, Elena chose the more difficult of the two cadenzas that Rachmaninoff had written. Her hands became a blur of movement, the notes cascading like a waterfall, building to a thunderous climax before returning to the main theme one final time. As the last notes of the first movement faded away, Elena slowly opened her eyes. The world came back into focus around her. The stage, the piano, the stunned faces of the faculty members standing in a semicircle around the instrument. Complete silence filled the hall. Then Professor Chen began to clap. The sound seemed to break a spell, and suddenly everyone was applauding. Teachers, administrators, students who had slipped into the hall during her performance, all except Dr. Hargrove, who stood frozen, his face pale with shock. Elena's hands trembled as she lowered them to her lap. What had she done? The careful wall between her past and present lay in ruins around her. There would be questions now, explanations required. Her quiet life of anonymity was over. "Who are you?" Dr. Hargrove finally managed to ask, his voice barely audible over the continued applause. Elena couldn't find her voice to answer. 20 years of silence were not easily broken. Professor Chen stepped forward, her eyes wide with recognition. "I thought I knew your face," she said quietly. "Elena Ruiz, you studied at the Madrid Royal Conservatory. You were supposed to perform with the Madrid Philharmonic 20 years ago, but you disappeared right before the concert." Elena nodded slowly, tears filling her eyes. "Yes," she whispered. The applause gradually died down as people realized something significant was happening. A circle had formed around the piano with Elena at its center. No longer invisible, no longer just the cleaning lady, but suddenly the most fascinating person in the room. "But why?" Professor Chen asked, gesturing to Elena's gray uniform. "Why? Are you here cleaning floors when you play like that? You're one of the most gifted pianists I've ever heard." Elena swallowed hard. She had kept her story locked inside for so long that finding the words was difficult. "My parents," she began, her accent thicker than usual with emotion. "They died in car accident 1 week before my concert with Madrid Philharmonic. My little brother, he was only 5, he had no one else, I had to take care of him." She looked down at her hands, the hands that had just coaxed such beauty from the piano, but also bore the marks of years of hard physical labor. "I came to America. There was no time for piano then. I needed job, needed to support us. And later," she shrugged, a small, painful gesture. "It was too late." "It's never too late," a new voice said. Elena looked up to see Lily, the young student she had helped the day before, pushing her way through the crowd of adults. "Not when you can play like that." Dr. Hargrove seemed to have recovered somewhat from his shock. "Why didn't you say something?" he demanded. "All these years mopping floors and you never once mentioned that you were a trained pianist?" There was accusation in his tone, as though Elena had deliberately deceived them all. Perhaps she had, in a way, but not for the reasons he imagined. "What would I say?" Elena asked simply. "That once I was going to be concert pianist, but now I clean toilets. Who would care about this sad story?" She shook her head. "Better to be invisible, better to be nobody." "But you're not nobody," Lily insisted. "You're amazing." A murmur of agreement ran through the crowd. Ms. Phillips stepped forward, looking at Elena with new eyes. "All these years," she said wonderingly. "I had no idea." "None of us did," Professor Chen said. She turned to Dr. Hargrove with a pointed look. "Well, Richard, still think Thomas Schuh is our best option for the Rachmaninoff?" Dr. Hargrove's face flushed. That's hardly the point. I think it's exactly the point, Professor Chen interrupted. She turned back to Elena. Mrs. Ruiz, Elena, would you consider performing for our spring showcase? Elena stared at her in disbelief. Me? But I have not played in 20 years until today. She gestured helplessly at the piano. And yet you just performed one of the most difficult pieces in the piano repertoire flawlessly, Professor Chen pointed out. Imagine what you could do with a few months of practice. The idea was so unexpected, so far removed from the life Elena had resigned herself to, that she couldn't find words to respond. She looked around at the faces watching her, some curious, some amazed, some still skeptical. Dr. Hargrove's expression was particularly sour, his earlier amusement completely gone. This is absurd, he said. We can't have our cleaning staff performing at the showcase. What would the donors think? They'd think we discovered an extraordinary talent, Professor Chen replied evenly. Isn't that what Westfield is supposed to be about? Recognizing and nurturing musical gifts? Elena stood up from the piano bench, suddenly overwhelmed. Too much had happened too quickly. The music that had been locked inside her for 20 years had broken free. And now everything was changing. I need to think, she said quietly. Please, I must go. She moved toward the edge of the stage, intending to retrieve her cleaning cart and escape the scrutiny of all these eyes. But as she passed Dr. Hargrove, he caught her arm. How did you learn to play like that? He asked, his voice low enough that only she could hear. There was something in his tone, not quite anger, not quite respect, but a complicated mixture of both. Elena met his gaze steadily. Same way as you, she replied. Years of practice, good teachers, and love for the music. She gently pulled, her arm free. Only difference is what happened after. Before anyone could stop her, Elena walked quickly through the crowd and out of the recital hall. She left her cleaning cart behind, needing to escape more than she needed to maintain appearances. The hallways that had been her domain for 7 years suddenly felt foreign, as though she were seeing them through new eyes. Outside, the late afternoon sun was warm on her face. Elena sat on a bench in the small garden behind the conservatory, her hands still trembling slightly. For the first time in 20 years, she had allowed herself to become visible. To be seen not as the quiet woman who cleaned the floors, but as the musician she had once been, still was, somewhere deep inside. It terrified her. And yet, beneath the fear, another feeling was stirring, something she had almost forgotten. Hope. Elena didn't return to the conservatory the next day, or the day after. She called in sick, something she had never done in 7 years of employment. Her supervisor was understanding. Perhaps word had already spread about what happened in the recital hall. In her small apartment, Elena paced restlessly. The walls seemed to close in around her. For 20 years she had lived a life of careful routine, work, home, taking care of her brother until he was old enough to move out on his own. She had found a certain peace in the predictability of her days and expecting nothing more than what she already had. Now that peace was shattered. The music had been set free, and it wouldn't easily be locked away again. On the third day, there was a knock at her door. Elena opened it to find Professor Chen standing in the hallway holding a folder of sheet music. May I come in? The older woman asked gently. Elena hesitated, then stepped aside. Her apartment was clean but sparse. A small sofa, a dining table with 2 chairs, bookshelves filled with paperbacks in both Spanish and English. No photographs on the walls, no piano, no sign of her former life. How did you find me? Elena asked, offering the professor a seat. Ms. Phillips gave me your address. I hope you don't mind. Professor Chen sat on the sofa, placing the folder on the coffee table. We've been worried about you. Elena made tea, buying herself time to think. When she returned with 2 cups, Professor Chen was leafing through one of the books from the shelf, a biography of Rachmaninoff. Interesting reading, choice for someone who claimed to know little about music, Professor Chen observed with a small smile. Elena shrugged. I never said I know little, I said I clean. Both can be true, Professor Chen replied, accepting the tea with a nod of thanks. Elena, I came here because we need to talk about what happened, and about what happens next. Nothing happens next, Elena said firmly, sitting in the chair opposite the sofa. I made mistake, I should not have played. That wasn't a mistake. Professor Chen leaned forward earnestly. That was one of the most remarkable performances of Rachmaninoff I've ever heard. And I've heard many, including from world-famous pianists. Elena looked down at her hands wrapped around the warm cup. It does not matter that life is over for me. Why? Professor Chen asked simply. Your brother is grown now, isn't he? Yes. He finished college 2 years ago. Works as engineer in California now. Then what's stopping you? Elena was silent for a long moment. What was stopping her? Fear, certainly. The fear of hoping again, of wanting something and losing it. The fear of being seen, truly seen, after so many years of invisibility. I am 45 years old, she finally said. Too old to start career in music. Professor Chen laughed softly. I have a student who began playing at 68 after she retired from dentistry. She just gave her first recital last month. She set down her teacup. Age is a poor excuse, Elena. 20 years without practice. And yet you played Rachmaninoff's third concerto as if you had never stopped, Professor Chen countered. Some things the body doesn't forget. Elena stood and walked to the window, looking out at the street below. Children were playing in the small patch of grass between apartment buildings, their laughter floating up to her window. I am afraid, she admitted quietly, her back to Professor Chen. What if I try and fail? Better to be nobody than to be somebody who failed. She heard Professor Chen rise and cross the room to stand beside her. I understand fear, the older woman said. When I was 30, I developed tendinitis so severe the doctor said I might never play professionally again. I spent 2 years afraid to touch a piano. 2 years working as a receptionist at a law firm, telling myself it was better this way, safer. Elena turned to look at her, surprised. What happened? Professor Chen smiled. A very stubborn old teacher showed up at my apartment with sheet music and refused to leave until I played for her, much like I'm doing with you now. She returned to the coffee table and picked up the folder she had brought. This is the full score for the Rachmaninoff. I also brought recordings of 3 different interpretations. She set the folder down, again. The spring showcase is in 8 weeks. That's plenty of time for someone of your talent to prepare. Dr. Hargrove would never allow it, Elena said, grasping at one more excuse. Dr. Hargrove doesn't have the final say. The faculty voted, yesterday. The decision was nearly unanimous. Nearly? Professor Chen's lips quirked in a half-smile. Richard abstained. Too proud to vote yes, too aware of how it would look to vote no. Elena returned to her chair, feeling suddenly exhausted. Too many emotions, too many possibilities swirling in her mind. I don't even have piano to practice on. The conservatory has 26 practice rooms and you have keys to all of them, Professor Chen pointed out. Come early, stay late. Practice whenever you can. She paused. Or there's another option. Elena looked up questioningly. We could offer you a different position, not as a cleaner, but as an artist in residence. It would include access to the faculty practice rooms, which are much nicer, and it would pay better. The idea was so unexpected that Elena couldn't find words to respond. A job at the conservatory, not cleaning floors but playing music? It seemed impossible, a dream too, fragile to touch. I cannot, she stammered. Why not? Because... Elena struggled to articulate the tangle of feelings inside her. Because that life ended for me. Because I am a different person now. Professor Chen studied her thoughtfully. Are you? Or have you just been hiding that person away? She reached across the small table and gently took Elena's hand, turning it palm up. These hands were made for music, Elena. Yes, they've done other work. Good, honest work that kept you and your brother alive. But that doesn't change what they were born to do. Elena closed her fingers around Professor Chen's, feeling tears threaten. "I am so afraid," she whispered again. "Of course you are," Professor Chen said kindly. "Creating beauty is always frightening. It makes us vulnerable. But living without it..." She shook her head. "That's no life at all." They sat in silence for a while, the decision hanging in the air between them. Finally, Elena took a deep breath. "If I say yes to performance, I keep my job as cleaner," she said firmly. "No special treatment. If it goes well, then maybe we talk about changes." Professor Chen smiled, clearly recognizing the compromise for what it was, a small step forward, a toe dipped cautiously into waters Elena had avoided for 20 years. "That's fair," she agreed. "So you'll do it? You'll play for the showcase?" Elena looked down at her hands again, the hands that had cleaned floors and scrubbed toilets, the hands that had also, just 3 days ago, brought an entire recital hall to stunned silence with their skill. "Yes," she said quietly. "I will try." The next morning, Elena returned to the conservatory with the Rachmaninoff score tucked into her bag alongside her usual work clothes. She arrived an hour earlier than usual, slipping into practice room 12, the furthest from the main hallway, the one least likely to be noticed. The small upright piano was nothing like the magnificent Steinway in the recital hall, but when Elena placed her fingers on the keys, the connection was immediate. She began slowly with simple scales and arpeggios, reacquainting her muscles with patterns they had once known by heart. By the time she needed to begin her cleaning duties, her fingers were already feeling more limber, more alive. Throughout the day, as she moved through the hallways with her cart, she was aware of eyes following her, of whispers as she passed. Word had spread quickly through the conservatory. The cleaning lady was a piano prodigy. The cleaning lady would be performing at the spring showcase. Some students looked at her with curiosity, others with something like awe. The teachers nodded to her in the hallways, acknowledging her presence in a way they never had before. Only Dr. Hargrove maintained his distance, watching her with narrowed eyes whenever their paths crossed. After her shift ended, Elena returned to practice room 12. She opened the Rachmaninoff score and began to work through it systematically, measure by measure. The notes were old friends, welcoming her back after a long absence. She lost track of time, absorbed in the music. When she finally looked up, startled by a knock on the door, the sky outside the small window was dark. "Sorry to interrupt," Lily said, poking her head into the room. "I just wanted to say I'm really excited that you're going to play at the showcase. Everyone's talking about it." Elena smiled, touched by the girl's enthusiasm. "Thank you. I am very nervous." "You shouldn't be. You play better than anyone I've ever heard." Lily hesitated, then added, "I was wondering, would you if you have time, would you listen to my Debussy piece again? I've been practicing what you showed me." Elena felt a warmth bloom in her chest. Not just the joy of returning to music herself, but the possibility of helping others find their way to it as well. "Yes," she said, moving over on the bench to make room. "I would like that very much." As Lily sat beside her and began to play, Elena realized that something fundamental had shifted inside her. The wall between her past and present hadn't just crumbled. It was being rebuilt into something new, something that incorporated both the woman she had been and the woman she had become. For the first time in 20 years, she felt whole. The next 6 weeks passed in a blur of work and practice. Elena continued her cleaning duties during the day, arriving 2 hours early each morning to practice before her shift and staying late into the evening. Her hands, already strong from years of physical labor, quickly regained their old flexibility and precision. The music that had lived silently within her for 20 years flowed more freely with each passing day. Word of her story had spread beyond the conservatory. A student had recorded part of her impromptu performance on a phone, and the video had found its way onto the internet, gathering thousands of views. Local newspapers picked up the story. The cleaning lady revealed as a piano virtuoso, preparing to perform one of the most challenging pieces in the classical repertoire. The attention made Elena uncomfortable, She had lived so long in the shadows that the spotlight felt harsh and exposing. But along with the discomfort came something else, a growing sense of purpose, of rightness. When her fingers touched the piano keys, she felt like herself in a way she hadn't for 2 decades. 2 weeks before the showcase, Elena was practicing late one evening when Dr. Hargrove appeared in the doorway of the practice room. He had largely avoided her since the day of her revelation, and she had been grateful for the distance. Now he stood watching her with an unreadable expression. "May I come in?" he asked stiffly. Elena nodded, her hands stilling on the keys. She had been working on the third movement, the place where Rachmaninoff demanded the most from the pianist, physically, technically, emotionally. Dr. Hargrove entered and closed the door behind him. He remained standing, too uncomfortable to sit. "Your playing has improved," he said finally. Elena raised an eyebrow. "I was not aware you were listening." A faint flush colored his cheeks. "I've heard you practicing. The walls here aren't exactly soundproof." They sat in awkward silence for a moment. Elena waited, sensing he had more to say. "I owe you an apology," he said abruptly. "The way I treated you, before I knew who you were, it was unacceptable." Elena studied him. His apology seemed genuine, if difficult for him to express. "You treated me like you treat everyone," she said quietly. "Like I was beneath you." Dr. Hargrove winced. "Yes, well, that's something I'm trying to address." "Good," Elena said simply. He cleared his throat. "I've been thinking about your interpretation of the second movement. The tempo you're taking in the middle section, it's unorthodox." Elena smiled slightly. Of course, he couldn't just apologize and leave. He had to establish his expertise, his authority. "It is how I feel the music," she said. "Yes, but tradition dictates—" "I don't care about tradition," Elena interrupted. "I care about what Rachmaninoff was trying to say." Dr. Hargrove looked taken aback by her directness. Then, to her surprise, he laughed, a short, genuine sound of amusement. "You know, that's exactly what my teacher told me when I was preparing this piece for my Vienna performance." He paused. I didn't listen to him either. Elena felt the tension between them ease slightly. "We are both stubborn, I think." "Indeed." He hesitated, then added, "For what it's worth, your interpretation is compelling. Not how I would play it, but it works." Coming from him, it was high praise. He turned to leave, then stopped at the door. "Thomas Shu has asked to switch his piece for the showcase. He says he's not ready for Rachmaninoff yet." Elena nodded, understanding the unspoken message. The student who had been the conservatory's star pianist had heard her play and recognized he couldn't match her performance. "He is very talented," she said, "but perhaps too focused on perfect notes instead of meaning. He will learn." Dr. Hargrove looked at her thoughtfully. "Perhaps you could teach him." The suggestion hung in the air between them, not just a casual comment, but a genuine possibility. Elena teaching at the conservatory, Elena passing on what she knew to the next generation. "Perhaps," she agreed softly. "Someday." Dr. Hargrove nodded and left, closing the door behind him. Elena turned back to the piano, her mind buzzing with the implications of their conversation. She had been so focused on the showcase performance that she hadn't thought much beyond it. What would come after? Would she return to cleaning, to invisibility? Or was another path opening before her? The night of the spring showcase arrived with a flurry of activity. The conservatory had been transformed. Fresh flowers adorned the entrance hall, programs were stacked neatly by the doors, and the recital hall gleamed under carefully adjusted lighting. Donors and music critics mingled with faculty and students, all buzzing with anticipation. Backstage, Elena sat quietly in a small dressing room. She had declined the offer of a new dress, choosing instead to wear the one nice outfit she owned, a simple black dress she had purchased years ago for her brother's college graduation. Professor Chen had insisted on having it professionally pressed, and someone from the costuming department had added a touch of deep red embroidery around the neckline, making it look far more elegant than its modest price tag would suggest. Knock at the door broke into her thoughts. 10 minutes, called the stage manager. Elena closed her eyes and took a deep breath. The nervousness she felt was different from her everyday anxiety. This was the familiar flutter of pre-performance excitement, the heightened awareness, the rush of adrenaline that would sharpen her focus and deepen her connection to the music. She had forgotten how it felt, this particular blend of fear and joy. Another knock, softer this time. "May I come in?" It was Professor Chen, not Elena, opened the door to find not just Professor Chen but a small group gathered in the hallway. Lily, Ms. Phillips, and even her brother Antonio, who had flown in from California as a surprise. "Tonio," she gasped, embracing him tightly. "You came?" "Of course I came," he said, holding her at arm's length to look at her. "My big sister is playing Rachmaninoff at Westfield. I wouldn't miss it for anything." "But your work is less important than this," he finished, firmly. At 25, Antonio had their father's height and their mother's gentle eyes. "I always knew you'd play again someday, Elena. Even when you didn't." Elena felt tears threatening and blinked them back. "I need to stay calm for performance," she said, her accent thickening with emotion. "We just wanted to wish you luck," Professor Chen said, ushering the others back. "We'll see you on stage." Antonio stayed behind for a moment. From his pocket, he pulled a small velvet box. "I found this when I was going through Mom's things last year," he said, opening it to reveal a delicate silver pin shaped like a piano. "She was going to give it to you after your Madrid concert. I thought you should have it tonight." Elena stared at the pin, memories washing over her, her mother's smile, her father's proud eyes when she played, the life they had dreamed for her. "Thank you," she whispered as Antonio carefully pinned it to her dress. "They would be so proud," he said softly. "I am so proud." When he left, Elena stood before the small mirror in the dressing room. The woman who looked back at her was neither the celebrated young pianist from Madrid, nor the invisible cleaning woman of the past 7 years. She was someone new, someone who carried both those lives within her. 5 minutes, called the stage manager. Elena closed her eyes one last time, gathering herself. Then she walked to the wings of the stage, where she could see the full house waiting. Every seat was taken, and people stood along the back wall. The Steinway grand piano gleamed. At the center of the stage, lid raised, ready. Dr. Hargrove stepped to the microphone to introduce her. His usual pompousness was tempered tonight, his words simple and respectful. "Ladies and gentlemen, it is my great privilege to introduce our soloist for this evening. Elena Ruiz studied at the Madrid Royal Conservatory before life took her on a different path. Tonight marks her return to the concert stage after 20 years. She will perform Rachmaninoff's Piano Concerto No. 3 in D minor, accompanied by the Westfield Conservatory Orchestra." He stepped aside and applause filled the hall as Elena walked onto the stage. The lights were bright, the faces in the audience blurred. She bowed slightly, then took her place at the piano. The conductor, Professor Garcia from the strings department, caught her eye and nodded. The orchestra waited, poised to begin. Elena placed her hands on the keys. All the hours of practice, all the years of silence, all the pain and fear and hope, everything distilled into this moment. She nodded to the conductor, and the opening notes of the orchestral introduction began. When she joined with the simple, haunting theme that begins the concerto, Elena felt something unlock inside her. The music flowed through her, not just from her memory or her fingers, but from some deeper place where art and emotion become one. She was no longer playing the piece. She was living it, breathing it, becoming it. The audience disappeared. The conservatory disappeared. Even her own story, the loss, the years of hiding, faded away. There was only Rachmaninoff's music, speaking through her hands, telling its tale of darkness and light, struggle and triumph. When the final chords, of the third movement thundered to their conclusion. Elena remained perfectly still for a moment, hands hovering above the keys. Then she slowly lowered them to her lap and raised her head. The silence lasted for 3 heartbeats. Then the hall erupted in applause. People rose to their feet, cheering and clapping. Flowers appeared on stage, tossed by audience members or brought forward by students. The orchestra members tapped their bows against their music stands, the traditional musician's sign of highest respect. As Elena stood to take her bow, she caught sight of her brother in the front row, tears streaming down his face as he applauded. Beside him, Professor Chen was beaming with pride. And there, in the back of the hall, standing by the door, was that Mrs. Abramowitz, her piano teacher from Madrid. Elena blinked, and the figure was gone. Perhaps just a trick of the light. Or perhaps something more, it didn't matter. What mattered was that Elena Ruiz had found her way home. Not to the past she had lost, but to the music that had always lived within her, waiting patiently to be set free. As she took her final bow, the silver piano pin caught the light, sending a small flash across the hall like a promise kept, like a dream reborn.